Hello everyone, just going to have a quick look at the weather for the next 8-10 days for today's second video. We've already done the AMO discussion, the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation discussion video. That can be found on the homepage. Just scroll down below this video a little bit and it'll be there underneath the link ads. It's also going to be placed on its own page at Gasworthy's, though, with a written summary for anybody that can't watch that video, so it'll be kept around the website indefinitely. It's quite an interesting video talking all about the Atlantic, the warming and cooling cycles that go on within the Atlantic within a 25 to 30 year sort of time scale, and talking about the cold blob and all of that kind of thing that we've been hearing a lot about over the past few months in the Atlantic Ocean. So you want to know all about the Atlantic Ocean and the AMO, check out that video. This is going to have a very quick look at weather the next week to 10 days. It looks like we're seeing the first signs of a pattern change for the second half of April. Very early days on this, but we might be starting to see signs of high pressure beginning to get in a little bit as we go beyond sort of the week ahead time frame. So we're talking about next weekend and then into the third week of April. I'll show you the charts in a second. Before I get on with that though, just very quickly to mention the ads. There's links to articles on all of the pages. I just mentioned them in relation to the AMO discussion. Have a browse through the link widgets and click through the links if there's any articles that you're interested in. Thanks very much for doing that. There's also video ads on most of the pages which open up in the content when you watch them. They'll close back up again. And it all helps to pay for Gasworthy's.com. So very quickly going to start off with the 500 millibar high anomalies for the next week to 10 days. So we've got the ECMWF here on the top, and the GFS is on the bottom. 500 millibars, 8,000 feet is an area in absolute high pressure, low pressure up being moved around by a jet stream running above. On these charts, red extrapolates to high pressure and blue extrapolates to low pressure. So the ECM for a week to 10 days time, this isn't going to be an immediate thing. We've got a very unsettled sort of 5 days or so ahead of us, but within the 7 to 10 day time frame, the ECMWF is placing quite a big ridge here around and ever so slightly to the northeast of the UK. This trough of low pressure has dominated most of April and will continue to do so, say, over the next 5 days, being pushed down to the south. So it means that the jet stream goes a little bit like that. There's definitely a ridge building there within the 500 millibar flow. And it does tie down to ridging through the Mediterranean as well. So potentially, if this was all to line up right, it could start to get a bit warmer, actually, through the second half of April. We would need to start to drag up the air from the south for that to happen, but it's not a million miles away from being able to do that on that chart. Now, I have to tell you about the GFS this morning was very different. So this is based on the midnight run of the GFS. In a few minutes, you're going to see the 6 o'clock run of the GFS, which looks different. But the midnight run of the GFS was actually very unsettled, just bringing in this trough of low pressure out west, very deep trough in the Atlantic. The ridge at the ECM was placing over the UK, up towards Scandinavia, and then going down into Eastern Europe. So much, much further east with that. And it just meant that essentially we were still bringing this very unsettled low pressure dominated weather into the country on the midnight run of the GFS. But the latest run, I'm going to show you the latest run in a second, has shifted towards more of an anticyclonic outlook from next weekend. So these are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next 2 weeks. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average. You see, we're generally going to be a bit above average, so I don't think we're going to be doing too badly overall with the temperatures. Nothing to get all that excited about immediately. So in the next week, there's nothing all that hot coming up or particularly warm, but certainly a little bit milder than average and overall not doing too badly with the temperatures. Now the precipitation is quite interesting. As I say, I've got a lot of rain to come over the next week, most definitely. So I've got all these precipitation spikes here for the next week from sort of today, well, tonight and tomorrow, and then going through to the weekend. But notice there is a drying trend here as we go into the second half of the ensemble, which is this part of the graph. You notice those rainfall spikes are reducing a lot. They don't completely go away, but they definitely reduce in size and in number, implying that as we go through the third week of April, we have probably got a drying trend here within the GFS ensembles, just hinting that ridging may be on its way. So let's have a look at the generic charts. This is the GFS for Thursday, still very much in an unsettled pattern. We've got the block pattern going on, of course, with the high pressure around Greenland and Iceland, the low pressure underneath it, and just bringing in these areas of low pressure off the Atlantic. So very unsettled conditions for the end of the week. We get into next weekend, though, and the trough begins to break apart. So some of the trough is going over to Scandinavia. Some of it is down off the coast of Portugal and down into the Azores. That's wrong. That should be an L for low pressure just there, and then the low pressure up here. And then in between this break within the trough, we've got this ridge starting to develop around the UK. Very flimsy looking ridge at that point on Saturday, but as we go through to Sunday, definite strengthening of the ridge is occurring, and by the time we get through to the third week of April, this is Monday the 18th, we find high pressure really starting to take over now. It is sitting still generally to the northeast of the country, so it's probably not going to be a heat wave, at least not initially. But it's definitely signs there that we've got a ridge building within the 500 millibar flow. And as we go out towards day 10, this takes us through to Tuesday the 19th and on into Wednesday the 20th. That high pressure does continue to take over. So definite drying, even if the temperatures aren't all that exciting, with the jet stream going rather like that. Around that ridge, we're bringing the air from the east, which is still generally quite chilly in April, and the air is actually originating from Scandinavia, Western Russia, so it's not going to be a heat wave up to the 20th of April on this scenario, but certainly drier conditions coming through there from next weekend. ECMWF, as we know, is very similar. That was leading the way with this idea of a pattern change this morning. So unsettled conditions through to the end of the week. Then we go through into weekends, keep it unsettled on Saturday, but by Sunday, ridge starting to develop through the country. That ridge strengthening as we go through into the start of the third week of the month. We go to day 10, Wednesday the 20th of April. High pressure very much dominating the weather. It's still more or less a northern blocking feature, really. It's a long way north. But luckily for us, the orientation of the air is still doing something like that, and we're still generally drawing the air up from central, maybe even southern parts of Europe, so that could be a little bit warmer actually than we're just looking at on the GFS. But the main thing, not so much for temperatures, I don't think there's any sign of anything all that warm coming up with this at the moment. The main thing is the drying trend from next weekend onwards. And then finally the GEM, which is always a bit different, and this is different because the low pressure just carries on. We don't build that ridge through. So we get into next weekend still under quite a deep trough of low pressure over the country. That just hangs around through into the third week of the month. We try to build a little bit of a ridge on Monday the 18th. Very flimsy, and it doesn't really come to anything. By the time I go through to day 10, which is the 20th of April, start to get an undercut. That high pressure's gone a long way north. It's up towards the far north of Scandinavia, and that's allowing this trough to undercut from the south again with the jet stream going like that. So the GEM, the Canadian, is much more unsettled. It's always a bit different, but of course, this was how the midnight run of the GFS was seeing things. That GFS run that I just showed you is a 6 o'clock run. It has shifted towards a high pressure scenario, but it differs from what the midnight GFS was showing. So it's rather uncertain what's going on here. We may be picking up the first signs of a pattern change towards higher pressure, higher heights as we go through into the third week of the month, starting next weekend and then carrying on into that working week of I think it begins Monday the 18th of April. Gonna have to wait and see. Very early days. I'll obviously be keeping you updated on this over the next few days, see whether this comes to anything. Even if we do build a bit of a ridge, I'm a bit concerned that it may just end up going north again and allowing the jet and the low pressure to undercut from the south. So it might only be 2 or 3 days of drier weather before the Atlantic again has another go at undercutting from the south. But, well, let's just wait and see where this goes. It might not come to anything, but it could be the first signs of something significantly drier, and maybe eventually even warmer as we go into the second half of April. Gonna have to wait and see what happens. That's it for now. Don't forget to check out the AMO update see what's going on in the Atlantic. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.